Duck, Schicklgruber. Here comes the roughest, toughest thing that flies. It's the B-24, heavyweight slugger of the American Air Armada and a champion in every pound of its 28 tons. Made in the USA. These men build it. These men fly it. But all their efforts wouldn't add up to a row of beans if these mechanics didn't keep it flying. The Technical Army of the United States, day and night preparing our warplanes for battle with regular, thorough inspections. And is that job important? Well,
inspections are the difference between winning and losing the war. We can go on building thousands and thousands of airplanes, but it won't do us any good if we can't keep them flying. In your hands, you mechanics, America has placed its Air Force. Yes, in your hands, America has placed its pilots as well. This is the B-24. Let's just take one of the many inspections a ship like this must undergo. Let's imagine we're in a combat area at a busy air base. It's early morning, and the ground crew is preparing for the first flight of the day.
All right, sir, let's imagine it. There they come, mechanics, crew chiefs, armorers, radio men. Meet Crew Chief Kelly. He's 25 and a veteran. There's the ship he's responsible for. 28 tons of wing destruction. And those mechanics with him know their stuff, too. So let's watch this team of all-Americans in action. The flight report is handed down. And this brings Kelly right up to date with the pilot. He approaches the nose and regards it carefully. Crew Chief Kelly's eyes are trained to spot any skin surface defect at a glance. Wrinkles, tears, cracks, bends, nothing is too minute. The fire extinguisher door, that's the carbon tet extinguisher. He makes sure it's full and fresh and that the seal is intact. Walking to the underside of the wing, his eyes are still on the prowl for surface defects. This is his ship and he's mighty proud of it. He sees that all inspection doors are in order. And all cowling properly fastened, looking for any excessive oil leakage which might indicate damage to the engine. Corporal Bates removes the cowling so Kelly can get at the fuel strainer. Both these men know the importance of separating water and sediment from the gas. Not only here, but from the main cells, which he'll drain later. An expert, like Kelly, can let the fluid drain until he sees he's getting 100% fuel. About a pint does the trick, although sometimes you have to drain more. Of course, the strainer is carefully re-safetied by Corporal Bates. Kelly now spins the supercharger turbine wheel for freedom of movement. Then examines the supercharger wastegate for general condition, seeing that it will be free to move even when it's red hot. The tire on the landing gear is checked for proper inflation by noting its contact with the runway. On soft ground, it's best to use a gauge. Watch that eagle eye on the alert for cuts, bruises, or small stones. The oleo strut gets the once-over for inflation. Then the brake lines for security of mounting and signs of leakage, all the way down. And down. If you look closely, you can see the static ground wire. This should be properly installed and must make contact with the ground. Kelly now moves over to the wheel well and examines it for damage or loose lines. He makes sure there's no mud or dirt from any previous landing. An inspection door improperly installed. Take care of that, Bates. Okay, Chief. The draining of the fuel strainer on the outboard nacelle involves the same operation as before, but Crew Chief Kelly doesn't miss any bets. supercharger turbine wheel, and wastegate. These checks are routine, but important. Then the rest of the wing for, yep, you guessed it, surface flaws and proper installation of all plates. Buckles or dents in the skin may be just words on an inspection form, but to Crew Chief Kelly, they're warnings of structural defects. The underside of the flap and aileron receives his critical attention. And he's particularly careful to inspect the de-icer boots along the entire leading edge of the wing for general condition, loose patches, and freedom from oil. Sounds superfluous, doesn't it? Remind me to tell you later what a little oil can do on that rubber boot. There's an oil splotch now. And it looks like a job for Sergeant Hammond. Mind getting that, Joe? You bet. Walking along the fuselage to the rear, breaks in the skin, dents, and wrinkles become a refrain. He inspects the tail bumper for general condition and freedom from mud and grass. How's it going, two-gun? Warm, eh? It'll be a lot warmer for that swastika crowd when this ship is up. At the tail, Kelly examines visually the underside of the stabilizer and elevator. Looks okay from down here. Now around the right side of the ship where the operations are identical with one exception. These are the CO2 fire extinguisher safety discs, and they must be undamaged if the plane is to be okayed for flight. Up front again, Crew Chief Kelly inspects the Bombardier's windows for cleanliness. He isn't above cleaning them either if there are signs of dirt, because he knows that all his efforts, all his mechanics' efforts, are for naught if the Bombardier can't see what he's doing. Someone's got to plant those eggs. That's why the Liberator was born. Bates, how about turning on a few switches in the cockpit? Bates enters through the bomb bay. Kind of crowded in here. This particular signal is Kelly's own. It means try the lights. Passing lights, landing lights, and don't forget those bottom recognition lights. Now the airspeed heads for heating. These are checked by the simple process of feeling for warmth. Turn it on, Bates. Yipe! That tube gets awful hot, chum. Okay, back to business. Try those intercooler shutters. Intercooler shutters are normally checked in the daily inspection, but Kelly believes in poking his nose into everything. Another one in the outboard nacelle. Looks okay, sounds okay. Exterior underside accounted for. How about the nose gear compartment? First, the tire, general condition and proper inflation. Kelly also notes the strut. Then up in the compartment, he checks the door closing mechanism for proper cocking and notes the safetying of the emergency release cable. The emergency lock pin must be unlocked. If it isn't, the nose gear can't be retracted in flight. He checks the emergency lever release arm for proper setting and safetying. Likewise, the hydraulic dump valve. This should be set properly and ready to relieve pressure in an emergency. Then the shimmy damper accumulator, which must register between 200 and 250 pounds pressure. He sees that all curtains are fastened tightly in place, then gives the whole compartment the once-over for loose objects. It's just an about face from the nose gear to the Bombardier's compartment. Here he sees that all equipment is properly stowed. The Bombardier would be a pretty unhappy man without oxygen. Kelly checks the pressure and flow. Extension lights, too, come in awfully handy in an emergency. Another quick once-over, and out he goes. Nose gear and bombardier's compartment. Check. Kelly makes a notation to that effect and glances at his watch. 25 minutes before the ship takes off. Already the armorers are preparing to load their eggs. Before entering the bomb bay, Kelly makes sure the wheel chocks are in place. He signals Edmonds to remove the tail skid support and hurries inside. Watch her settle. Tail okay for oxygen and stowage. Moving forward, Kelly sees that the engine covers are secure. More oxygen for belly and waist gunners. Kelly always makes sure there's no grease on his person in checking these regulators, because grease is to oxygen what a cigarette is to a gas tank. Lights. They go on, they go off. As simple as that. The camera vacuum supply valve must be in off position. It is. Forward he goes and makes sure the seal on the CO2 fire extinguisher is intact. Yes, the toilet, too. It's not exactly the men's room at the Waldorf, but it needs paper. This is another can. See the top of it? It carries 5 gallons of spare hydraulic fluid, and it must be full. A final all-inclusive glance to make sure that all equipment is properly stowed. And up we go over the bomb bay. That's the hand starter crank he's feeling for. All the hand starter crank has to be is present and, of course, secure. On the other side of the compartment, he inspects the fuel transfer system for general condition and flicks the electric pump switch. 10% of Kelly's life is spent crawling through tight places. It's this sort of thing that gives a crew chief housemaid's knee. Everything in order? Everything stowed right? Well, if it wasn't, it is. Now in the bomb bay. Here's where he drains the cells and the rest of the fuel system. After which he re-safeties all drain cocks. Bomb doors should be closed before the hydraulic reservoir is checked. Up above, he checks the fluid level in the reservoir. Oxygen again. And let there be light in the bomb bay. More light. Everything else present and accounted for, and down goes a check mark in the inspection form. This is the crew chief's personal box score, and its contents will be transferred to 41B, the maintenance inspection record. Now over in the nose wheel compartment, Kelly inspects the auxiliary power plant. Quantity of fuel and voltage output. 28 volts is right. The batteries, they must be mounted securely. Down goes another check mark in that portable fever chart. Moving back, Kelly turns on the electric hydraulic pump switch. Then, purely to save himself steps, he sets all 4 fuel cocks in position to start the engine. Wrinkles, tears, dents, they're just as likely to be on the upper side as the underside. Refueling. Boy, does this baby use gas. Kelly would hate to have to support her on his pay. Actually, all tanks should have been filled the day before. But then this is one of the reasons for pre-flight inspection. Somebody got sloppy yesterday and left the tanks only 3/4 full. Oil in number 3 nacelle. Hey there, not a screwdriver. You ought to know better than that. Poking a tool like that into a gas tank is leading with your chin. For one thing, it can pollute the contents, but worse than that, it can fall in and gum up the works. That's better. Duly chastened, Hammond is particularly careful to close the fuel inlet and safety the catch, while Kelly moves over to the outboard nacelle for a check of oil. I got that one, Chief. She's okay. Right, Corporal. Kelly strides away to continue his visual inspection of the upper side. Time's running low, and there's still a lot of B-24 to cover, so let's hit the high spots with Crew Chief Kelly. Out on the wing, his eyes prowl again for surface defects. He sees that all inspection doors are in place. At the tail end, he inspects the top surface of elevators and horizontal stabilizers, the vertical fins and the rudders, the de-icer boots for punctures and obvious defects. The same goes for the other one. Oil in the other nacelles. The life raft doors for proper installation. And the operation of all lights visible from the top. The signal is for the man in the cockpit to turn on the switches. Back through the hatch. He sees that the life raft release handle is safetied in place, and that the seal on the CO2 fire extinguisher is intact. There's no hostess on a bomber, but drinking water is important. Now the whole flight deck to see that all equipment is securely in place. And Kelly is ready to settle down with a book for 3 or 4 seconds. No, it's not Flash Gordon. It's the flight report, and all entries should be complete. The data case should contain all required publications, and the pilots' and co-pilots' checklists should nestle cozily in their appointed spots. Kelly glances over the whole cockpit carefully, and then stows the control lock. 3 sliding windows are a necessity, and the window only serves its purpose if it's clean. Sergeant Hammond now cooperates in the check of all flight controls. The ailerons must operate freely to their full range. Okay for ailerons. The same goes for elevators and rudders. Check. Trim tabs are adjusted to neutral position. And the following instruments checked for 0 reading: main hydraulic pressure gauge, suction gauge, rate of climb indicator. The airspeed indicator should also read 0, but if it doesn't, don't ground the ship. It's merely registering a breeze outside. Kelly now sets his altimeter to station altitude. He checks the turn indicator, seeing that it spins freely. The pilot's oxygen regulator. Kelly now moves over to the co-pilot seat. He turns the batteries and master ignition switch back on, noting that the brake pressure rises to approximately 1,050 pounds. If the brake pressure fails to rise, corrections must be made before the ship is released for flight. Note also, when switches are turned on, the landing gear lockdown light flashes. Kelly double checks this because he knows that the light indicates the security of the landing gear. Instruments must be readable. Kelly catches a few smudges. He checks the free air thermometer, the oil temperature gauges, and the cylinder temperature gauges for readings consistent with atmospheric temperature. It's a good policy for the pilot to know what time it is. Kelly winds the clock and tries the alarm bell. Turning on the inverter, he checks fuel pressure gauges and oil pressure gauges for zero readings. The tachometers for zero, too, and directly above, the manifold pressure gauges for readings consistent with station altitude. This should approximate the readings on the barometric scale of the altimeters. Then the operation of the hand hydraulic pump, partially lowering and raising the wing flaps and noting the flap position indicator. In the Liberator, as Kelly knows, the flaps are best checked for full range with number 3 engine running, since the hydraulic pump is mounted on that engine. Oxygen for the co-pilot, and Crew Chief Kelly is ready for that all-important phase of pre-flight inspection, the engine run-up. The switches are off, signals Kelly. Okay for the propellers. Satisfied that there's no chance of suddenly becoming a hamburger, the boys approach and begin turning the props in their normal direction of rotation, meanwhile looking for nicks, cracks, or excessive oil leakage around the hub. On the other side, the same operation is taking place. Propellers should have no excessive play. Kelly now sets the parking brakes. Then the controls for starting. Propellers in full increase RPM. Cowl flaps and intercooler shutters open. Fire extinguisher selector valve to engine which is to be started first. He turns on all fuel booster pumps and sees that they're developing normal fuel pressure. Mixture controls at idle cutoff position. Throttles about 1/5 open, and supercharger controls in off position. In the Liberator, the number 3 engine is normally started first because it operates the hydraulic pump, which in turn ensures that the landing gear is locked down. Naturally, the landing gear lever should be checked for down position. Ready for number 3. Kelly gives his men the clear sign. He energizes number 3 starter, priming the engine by closing the primer switch for a couple of seconds. When the starter is fully energized, he closes the meshing switch, and as she fires, pulls the mixture control to automatic lean position. Note the mechanic standing by with extinguisher, just in case. He sets the throttle so that the engine will idle at approximately 1,000 RPM. And proceeds to start the other engines in sequence of 4, 2, 1. As each engine fires, Kelly checks the oil pressure gauge to make sure that the big Pratt Whitneys are getting proper lubrication. While waiting for the engines to reach operating temperature, Kelly checks all engine instruments for functioning and indications consistent with the stage of warm-up. These instruments are the pulse, the very heartbeat of the engine, and will be the first to reveal any malfunction. With the engine still warming up, Kelly signals for a check of de-icer boots. De-icer boots, okay. Now let's get the cowl flaps. In operating these, Kelly always allows the motor to stop before reversing the cowl flap motion. Failure to do this, he knows, may seriously damage the mechanism. He checks the engine hydraulic pump, the hydraulic pressure gauge, then the flap position indicator by lowering and raising the flaps through their full range. Flaps okay. Back in the co-pilot seat, he checks all magneto switches for off position. Quickly, too. From long experience, Kelly knows that the engine should not be tested more than 2 or 3 seconds with the magneto switch off. Then the master ignition switch, off and on fast. The engine should cease firing momentarily. Well, we should be warmed up enough now for the full power operation check. First, mixture controls to automatic rich position. Then, with the engines at 1900 RPM, check the propeller governors for full range. Decrease RPM till the limit lights go on. Then, increase RPM and watch the tachometers climb until the limit lights go on again. Then check each magneto separately, both to left, both to right. RPM should not drop more than 75. Incidentally, these turbo supercharger controls should never be in the on position during the magneto check. Sergeant Hammond now checks the generators for 28 volts, making sure that all generator switches are in the off position. He then turns the generator switches on, one at a time, and observes the charging rate on each ammeter. He knows it's important that all 4 generators cooperate in sharing the airplane's electrical load. Vacuum selector cock to alternate position. And Kelly notes that the suction gauge still reads about 4 inches for the other engine. At this point, again, Kelly checks all engine instruments for readings consistent with the stage of warm-up. With the propellers in increase RPM, he advances each throttle against the stop. The manifold pressure gauge should come up to the proper reading, and the tachometer should steady at about 2500. Finally, with throttle against stop, he advances the supercharger control till the manifold pressure gauge goes up to red line. Both controls are now against the stops. If they weren't, Kelly would immediately adjust the supercharger stop so that all 4 engines would develop the same takeoff power. Satisfied that his engines are operating smoothly and that his engine instruments are functioning as they should, Kelly checks with the other men on the ship, the armorer and the radio mechanic, before closing up shop. Once he's initialed that flight report, Kelly's job is over. It's up to the pilot and his crew now, and don't think the guy with the wings sells Kelly short. Good luck. So long, fellows. We'll bring back a piece of Dusseldorf. 28 tons of trouble on the wing. Yes, Crew Chief Kelly, in your hands and the hands of the men who work with you, America has placed its Air Force.